Silence, please. I'll stand. Coroners Court is now sitting.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Your Honour. I call Mr. Andrew Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Harker.
Giving evidence via AVL.
Mr. Benson, can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, I can.
All right, you'll just hear from the court officer now.
Silence, please. Do you solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Harker.
Thank you, Your Honour. Would you please state your full name?
My full name is Andrew James Benson.
Your occupation?
I'm currently acting as a field supervisor in National Parks and Wildlife Service at Mudgee.
And your work address?
Is 27 Inglis Street, Mudgee 2850.
Thank you, Mr. Benson. You prepared a statement and gave it to the police on the 13th of July 2020, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Have you read that statement recently?
Yes, I've read over it recently.
Are there any changes which you'd like to make to that statement?
There's no changes to the statement, no.
Your Honour, for completeness, that's at tab 20 of the brief.
Thank you.
Mr. Benson, how long have you been with the National Parks and Wildlife Service?
I started in National Parks in 2011, June 23rd.
And you've previously also been... sorry, please continue.
No, I think those are in the date. Sorry, I can't. It was around June 2011.
And have you previously also been a member of the Rural Fire Service?
Correct.
How long were you a member of the RFS?
I started in Hazelbrook in 2003 and continued active up until 2011.
While you were in the RFS, did you complete any training in relation to the investigation of fires or wildfires?
It just cut out. I got investigation.
I'll repeat the question. Thanks, Mr. Benson. While you were with the RFS, did you complete any training in relation to the investigation of fires and wildfires?
Yes, that's correct. I did the fire investigator course in 2011 with the RFS when I was part of Chifley Zone at Janelle Caves.
Was that course focused on wildfires?
Correct. Wildfire investigation.
And from that course, do you know how to identify fire indicators and patterns, such as the angle of char and foliage freeze?
It just broke out, but I'm pretty sure, I'll just repeat, you said identify fire indicators, patterns, and foliage freeze, was it?
Do you know how to identify from that course fire indicators and patterns, such as angle of char and foliage freeze?
Yes, correct, I do.
In your time with the Rural Fire Service and the National Parks and Wildlife Service, have you seen trees before that have been hit by lightning?
Yes, so part of my role is as a remote rapid aerial response fire responder. We often go to remote fires in the middle of national parks, and yes, quite often I see trees that have been hit by lightning.
Turning to the 26th of October 2019, you were part of the rapid aerial response team on that day?
Yes, that's correct.
And you and the team took off by helicopter from Ralston in the late morning?
Yes, that's correct.
And what was the purpose of the flight?
It was a detection flight, previous storm activity. So there's some triggers for standing upright. So obviously the storm activity had been through, I believe, the day before. It was a few years ago. So we'd been called up as a team to go and investigate for lightning strikes, and there'd also been a fire or a reported lightning strike at the back of Avis. So that was focused to look at it as well. Sorry, just to elaborate a bit more, Avisford is south of Mudgee.
Thank you. So you flew towards Oversford and then towards Turon?
I just lost connection, sorry.
No,
With you
it's
then.
no problem. If you ever have any difficulty hearing me, Mr. Benson, just please point it out as you have so far.
Yeah,
Thank you. So you flew towards Abbotsford and then Turon?
correct.
And while you're flying towards Turon, what did you see?
There was a smoke plume out, or would have been on my left-hand side of the door. The crew person actually spotted it first, but it was over towards Gospers Mountain. We could see the smoke plume coming up in the sky.
You then flew towards that fire?
Yes, that's correct.
How large was the fire when you arrived?
I'd have to go to my statement for that. I believe it was the size of a football field. So that's what we refer to when I'm giving sit reps, because everybody knows what a football looks like, a football field. So I'd say 100 by 100 square metres.
Ms. Benson, you feel free to look at your statement if you need to in response to any questions. I think it's
Okay.
paragraph 8 is the relevant paragraph. I think you say 1.5.
Yes, I've got that. Yep. Okay. Yes, sorry, I apologise about that. Yep, 1.5 football fields. Yes, so that would probably be, yep, that'd be about 150 metres square, correct.
What was the flame height that you observed?
Flame height would have been 1 to 2 metres, and as we were doing orbits of the fire, there was gusts of wind, and then it's actually crowned, so that could be, crowning could be up to 2 stories.
How strong were the gusts of wind that you mentioned?
I didn't have any, anything in the backseat of the helicopter measure the wind, but I know the pilot was having trouble holding the machine, and I remember when we were flying to the north, he got blown really hard and he had to swing his nose back around into the wind. So that's generally indicating that's strong wind. So,
And because of that wind, a crew couldn't be winched into the site, could they?
no, they couldn't.
And a helicopter wasn't able to carry out a bucket drop?
The desk breakout helicopter wasn't able to carry out.
Because of the wind, was the helicopter able to carry out a bucket drop?
No, bucketing wasn't an option with that wind. He couldn't even do low orbits of the fire at the time.
So you made a request for, I think it was a very large air tanker?
The crew leader made a request, yes, so that would have been Rob Smith, to back to the IMT in Ralston for an air tanker. That is correct.
The very large air tankers, they're the converted passenger jets, aren't they?
VLAT, yes. Yes, correct.
So a
Passenger
VLAT
jets converted to fly.
a VLAT wasn't available at the time. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was correct. I believe, from my recollection, that the request was put to the state air desk, and they said that the VLAT had other priorities within the state.
But the National Parks managed to arrange further aerial support in the form of one plane, is that correct?
I recall, yes, listening onto the airband on the way back, and they had got a air tractor, which is a smaller belly tanker plane.
And when that plane arrived, you returned back to Ralston, is that correct?
We didn't see the plane. We actually were on our way back to Ralston, and the planes had been deployed, and I heard on the airband radio that I believe he was close to Mudgee on his way to the fire, so we didn't actually see the first drop on the first day of the...
So the next day, the 27th of October, you returned to the fire ground?
That's correct.
And that day you were able to be winched in?
Yes, that is correct.
And were you winched in to the south of the fire?
Yes, that's correct.
And you cut a helipad to enable the rest of the crew to be landed. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So once the crew was on the ground, do you move into the fire ground? Was that to the north?
Yes, that is correct. Once the helipad had been completed and all the crew on the ground, yes, we progressed to the north,
And you sent
to the fire ground.
some coordinates to the incident controller, Mr. Bryce?
Yes, I did.
And is that the point where you entered the fire ground?
Yes, I did. I've had that in the statement and in one of the text messages where we entered the fire ground.
And did you establish that as an anchor point for operations throughout the day?
Yes, that's correct.
And the crew split at that point?
Correct. One crew went east and one crew went west.
And the crew that went west, who was in that crew?
That was Kevin McKenzie and Lenny Smiles Smith.
And it's Mr. Smiles Smith, is that correct?
Smith, sorry. Yes, Smith is the English version. Schmidt is the German version, sorry.
And you're supported by air support?
Correct. We had Park Air 2, I believe, Firebird 249 and Helitac 227.
In the afternoon of the 27th of October, did you walk over to see Kevin and Lenny?
Yes, I did.
Did they say anything to you about a tree?
They did. Again, to my recollection, they said, did you see the tree that had been hit by lightning? And I hadn't seen it on my walk up to them at that time.
And when you were walking back to the east, did you come across any tree of particular note?
Yes, I did. That's when I was walking back and I did notice a stringy bark that had been hit by lightning. So there was... sorry, I was diversing. That's the question answered. So sorry, yes, go ahead.
How would you describe the tree that you saw?
So the tree that I saw would be approximately, as it stood, it would have been 2 stories high. For a reference, the top had been hit, which I believe by lightning. So the tree had been split and a limb was laying down to the south. It wasn't completely burnt. It's like because the middle was still open and wasn't charred.
Was it smouldering at all?
At that point, no, the fire had progressed past the tree.
Did you see any foliage still intact at the top of the tree?
Top of the tree. So because the top had been split out, the foliage at the top of the tree wasn't intact, but on the limb on the ground, there was still a little bit of foliage intact. It had been burnt, but it wasn't completely burnt.
So Mr. Smiles Schmidt told the police that he saw a tree with its top section, in his words, blown out. Would you use those words, blown out, to describe the top section of the tree that you saw?
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, it'd been hit, and that's probably a fair to say it's been blown out when it's split open and, yeah, opened up.
Do you remember the tree well enough that if I showed you a photograph of a tree in that general area, you'd be able to say whether it resembled what you saw?
I believe so, yes.
If I could bring up page 113 of the brief, please. I'll show you 2 photographs, Mr. Benson. Can you see that, Mr. Benson?
There's just something in the way, so stand by. Yes, I can.
It's one photograph. We'll show you another photograph, which is a close-up of the top of the tree on page 114 of the brief. That's the close-up image of the top of that tree. If we could please go back to 113. Having seen those photographs, Mr. Benson, does that resemble the tree that you saw?
No, I think the tree I saw would have been a little smaller than that, and the top wasn't as high as standing.
I'll show you another two photographs now, Mr. Benson. If we page 65, please, Tanner. This is a photograph taken in January 2020. Can you see that on your screen, Mr. Benson?
I can.
So that's the tree. At the base of the tree is a page 65, please, in the brief. 64. Is a photograph of a branch that had fallen from the tree. Can you see that there?
I can, yes.
And do those two photographs resemble the tree that you saw on the 27th of October?
That would resemble closer to what I saw. If you don't mind, in the first photo you had, previous to that, there was a branch laying over. Was that facing to the south? So in the bottom left-hand corner, is that a branch hanging down?
Which part of the image?
Where the little dot was on the screen, I just wanted to move over. So the bottom left-hand corner.
So, Tanith, quickly zoom in on the part of the screen just above D024. Sorry, Mr. Benson, the computer's not complying.
No, that's okay.
So that's zoomed in there.
Okay,
So,
that might be another tree, is it? I'm just seeing whether that's a limb on the left-hand corner hanging, but it possibly is another tree standing behind. It might have just been the image. But look, that actually does look more like the tree that I've seen, to the best of my recollection, as 2.5 years ago.
No, certainly. Thank you, Mr. Benson. Did you observe any fire indicators surrounding that tree on the 27th of October?
Yeah, just from my perspective, I didn't actually do a thorough investigation because I was only walking back. So I only seen the southern side of the tree is where I picked up. So once I noticed the tree, I was on the southern side of it and a little bit to the eastern side of it. So, but in saying that, at the back of the southern side, the indicators to me would indicate backing fire because the ground was a little bit bony and the fire had worked its way to a rock shelf. So that was, I don't know if there was pictures of the rock shelf nearby, but there was a 1.5 metre ledge where it back to. I do remember that. And in front of the tree at the time, I also do remember the shrubs hadn't been completely burnt. This would be on the eastern side. So there's like an unburnt pattern through it. And further up, I do recall seeing foliage freeze where the fire directed. So that would have been heading to the northeast. But next to the tree, there was no foliage freeze. It was just sort of understood. I think I referred in my statement like it had fingered out, so to speak.
And did it finger out, I think you say in your statement, to areas that had been completely burnt?
Yes, correct.
So after making those quick observations, did you receive a radio communication?
I did. I'd have to refer to my statement, but I believe I did, yes.
But was that communication, for completeness, I'll take you to the part of your statement, Mr. Benson, just so you can refamiliarise yourself. Is it paragraph 18? page 561 of the brief.
Yes, I have it now. Yep. Correct. So yes, I received a communication call from Michael O'Neill on the eastern side, the crew leader.
And that was to the effect that the fire was working its way back around to the south?
Correct. So they were heading down the eastern side. There was a bit of a cliff line heading down towards a creek. And once below the cliff line, the prevailing winds had picked up and it had blown out around to the south, correct.
And did you also receive a communication from Kevin and Lenny on the western front?
Correct, I did.
And what did they say?
They said that the western line had also, they must have overheard Mika on the, they would have overheard Mika on the radio, and they had also said that they had been impacted by fire on their western line. And they were also looking to move back and fall back into the black, I believe, were their words.
So you all retreated back into the black at the anchor point?
It would have been in further from the anchor point, yes, correct. A little bit more into the north.
And the tree that you saw, was it possible that that was likely affected by fire again when the fire wrapped back around on itself?
I believe so, because that rock shelf I referred to earlier had also, like, the fire had gone to the south of that as well and wrapped back around. So, and it was quite intense at the time and fire was crowning. So whatever fire would have been, or what remaining unburnt fuel around that tree would have been more than likely scorched in my view.
And how far away was the tree from the point where you entered the fire ground?
I didn't have an exact grid reference, but I think from my statement, I recall it was approximately 100 metres to the north-west, but more to the west. So more bearing west than north, makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Benson. I'm not going to keep you much longer, just a few more questions.
No, that's fine.
How would you describe the terrain that you faced on that day?
It's pretty well standard Wallamai terrain. So where we were, where the fire was, it was on top of the ridge top. The eastern line would have been steeper than the western line. As the west, when we were on top of the western line was still on top of the ridge, but the eastern line had regressed down a hill, so that would have been steeper. It was rocky, sandstone country. There would have been, there actually, come to think of it, there was ironstone as well, fragments. I remember that, bits of red iron matter amongst the sandstone.
Could you have accessed it on foot?
The nearest road would have been the Army road off the old Army airstrip out on Gospers. It would, I mean, it's possible, but it's a fair walk, and you would have been pushing through unburnt country at the time, so it would have been a fair hike in.
It would have been too dangerous, given the conditions?
Are you referring to the first day?
Both days.
Yeah, so the first day definitely wouldn't have been an option given the wind and the prevailing weather. It would have been dangerous. The second day, it wouldn't have been probably a viable option because where we were to the south was the least activity. If you were over on the road, I recall that was a little bit more to the north. So that would have probably been, the fire would have been pushing towards the road. So that would have endangered the crew if you're walking towards the head of the fire. Was there any more to that question? Sorry.
No, thank you. In your view, would there be any reason for any person to go to that part of Wallamai National Park?
I don't believe so. It's a long way in and it's behind locked gates. So believe it's over at Gangutty near Don Swamp is where you'd have to open up to access the Army Road. So it's a long walk and a long, long way. But in saying that, in my view, I'm not 100% sure. Like, people end up in the bush at all places at all times for random reasons, but I wouldn't know why anybody would want to particularly go to this particular spot, because it was remote and not really central to anywhere.
Thank you, Mr. Benson. Just one final image that I neglected to show you, which is at page 105 of the brief. This is a photo of a different tree,
Okay.
Mr. Benson. Does this resemble at all the tree that you saw?
No. Definitely not.
Thank you. Your Honour, those are...
I believe that's it. It looks like a different species as well. I don't think that one's a stringy bark.
Thank you, Mr. Benson. I'll just see if there's any questions from Mr. Newton.
No questions, Your Honour.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Benson. You're excused.
Thank you very much.
Your Honour, that may be a convenient time to take the morning adjournment.
Yes, we'll adjourn and resume at 11:30.
Silence, please, all stand. Coroners, court has resumed.
Yes, Ms Ward.
Your Honour, the court now moves to a consideration of the cause and origin of the Growth Valley fire. This fire commenced on the 14th of December 2019 and is associated with the Gospers Mountain fire, so it's therefore been listed and conducted essentially in tandem with Your Honour's inquiry into the Gospers Mountain fire. Yesterday's opening submissions covered both the Gospers Mountain fire and the Growth Valley fire, and I won't repeat them in any detail today. If there are community members or other members of the public watching on today for the purpose of the Growth Valley fire and who wish to obtain further details from the opening submissions, they're able to access those opening submissions through the Coroners Court website, where they'll find the YouTube streaming from yesterday's proceedings. Your Honour, I mean no disrespect to the people terribly affected by the Growth Valley fire by briefly now putting that fire into the broader context of Your Honour's overarching inquiries into the 2019-2020 Black Summer bushfires. Approximately 92 fires were reported to Your Honour arising from that period. That does not account for all of the fires across that season, just the fires that were formally reported to this court. They tended to be the biggest and most significant of the fires. From those 92 fires, 42 fires have or will proceed to a cause and origin hearing. Of those 42 fires, only a smaller representative sample will go through to a stage 2 hearing, which will focus on particular systemic matters that will be identified by Your Honour, warranting further investigation. The Growth Valley fire is one of that smaller number of fires which will proceed to a stage 2 hearing. In addition, Your Honour has conducted coronial inquests into the deaths of 25 people across the 2019-2020 bushfire season. So the hearing today, Your Honour, into the Growth Valley fire is confined to the cause and origin of the fire and sits within a larger number of terrible and terrifying fires from across that season. In some ways, the Growth Valley fire had an impact that extends beyond the statistics that Your Honour will shortly receive from, that Your Honour has received from within the brief, which set out in numerical terms the number of hectares burnt and the number of houses lost or destroyed. This fire, along with the Gospers Mountain fire, in fact impacted upon Sydney and the Central Coast and beyond, because although we were safe from the flames down in Sydney, many of us will remember day after day of smoke blanketing the city and the suburbs, and of waking up to the smell and the taste of fire in the air. Of course, our experience within Sydney pales in comparison to the experience of the people who were directly affected by the Growth Valley fire and who actually lived through the events that were captured in the photos and the footage that were played yesterday during opening submissions. So today's inquiry into the Growth Valley fire will focus on those two matters concerned with cause and origin. What caused the fire and where did it start? From within the brief of evidence, the court well understands that community concerns extend beyond those two bare questions, and indeed community questions extend beyond fire containment strategies on the 14th of December to issues arising earlier in the month and after that containment strategy on 14 December. So at the risk of further repetition, I'm just emphasising here, these issues will not be explored this week, but this fire will go on to a stage 2 hearing, and some of those issues will likely be explored through further evidence at that later point in time. Moving then to the cause and origin investigation, the first witness today, Your Honour, is Detective Sergeant Laura Harvey, and I call the Detective Sergeant now.
Thank you.
Silence, please. You swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say I do.
I do.
Have a seat. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's up to you whether you can have the mask on or off. It's up to you.
Would you state your name, rank and station?
Yes, Laura Harvey, Detective Sergeant, and I work at Windsor Police Station, which is Hawkesbury Police Area Command.
Are you the officer in charge of the Coronial investigation into the cause and origin of the Gross Valley bushfire?
Yes, I am.
In that capacity, have you provided a statement to the court dated the 2nd of October 2020?
That's correct.
Do you have a copy of that statement with you?
I do.
And does that statement remain true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information and belief?
Yes, it does.
Detective, you've told the court this morning that the Windsor Police Station sits within the Hawkesbury Police District.
Yes.
Can you explain to Her Honour how it is that the investigation into the Gross Valley fire came to be allocated to you?
Yes, I returned to work after a period of leave during the beginning of the Gospers Mountain Fire, and we had discussions at work and met with some arson team investigators along with some Blue Mountains Area Command detectives, and we discussed how the fires would be investigated and who by, and it was nominated that Hawkesbury would take the investigation for the Mount Wilson backburn. At the time, we were led to believe that it happened in the Hawkesbury Local Area Command. There was just a mix-up of information, and I nominated myself to run the investigation. Shortly after, we realised it had occurred in the Blue Mountains Local Area Command, but I was to retain the investigation due to the nature of some other duties that the Blue Mountains Police had, so I was remained the OIC of that fire.
Do you have any particular or specialised expertise in fire investigations?
No, not particularly, no.
So is it fair to say at the time that the investigation into this fire was allocated to you, police were of the understanding that the fire had originated within the Hawkesbury Police District?
That's right.
You've told Her Honour this morning that there were other competing demands on police investigators, both within the Blue Mountains District and beyond. What were those demands? Do you recall?
I don't recall, but they had some major investigations happening in the small Blue Mountains detectives, within the detective's office in the Blue Mountains, competing with some other things, so...
There were also other fire investigations that needed to be undertaken at around the same time, is that correct?
Around the same time there were further fires identified up in the mountains area.
Did you yourself have any familiarity with either the Mount Wilson geography or the community there prior to starting your investigation into this fire?
No, I didn't.
In the course of your investigation, were there pros and cons to not being a local, but investigating a fire that we now believe started on Mount Wilson Road?
Yes, I guess it was a pro for me having no knowledge of any of the locals, or not having known any locals or any of the RFS brigades up there. I guess I had a overall independent view on everything that I found. Yeah.
So no prejudgment.
No prejudgment, no.
And what about cons in terms of your investigation, given that you did not know the geography or the community prior to starting the investigation? Mainly
just the tyranny of distance from our command to the site and to the locals and to the houses that were affected. However, then as it made its way down into the Hawkesbury, it became closer to our area.
So as the fire progressed, it progressed into area covered by the Hawkesbury Police District, with which you were familiar.
Correct.
Given that you don't have any particular or specialised expertise in fire investigations, were you able to draw on the expertise of specialised fire investigators, either with the RFS or police or elsewhere?
Yes, there was other information available to me to assist.
We'll come to that in a moment, but firstly, do you understand, Sergeant, that today the evidence you give will be focusing on the issues of the cause of the the cause of the Grosse Valley fire and the origin of the Grosse Valley fire?
Yes.
Did you ultimately request a physical examination of the scene where you understood the Grosse Valley fire was likely to have ignited?
Yes.
And could you just explain to Her Honour broadly where that physical scene was?
My request was to be focused on Mount Wilson Road, the intersection of Mount Wilson Road and Bell's Line of Road. I believe the suburb is Mount Tomah at that point. That's where I knew it to have occurred.
And what was that opinion based upon?
Data that I'd read from the RFS, from the information that I received and from access we had to some of their websites, and also based on local information and the current news bulletins that were broadcast from the scene. And yep.
Had you been able to canvass any local witnesses at that point?
At the early stages, I hadn't. No, it was some time before I spoke to locals and the local fire brigades.
Right. I'm now going to have a map brought up on screen. Detective Sergeant, this is not one of your maps. It comes from a factual investigation report prepared by the Rural Fire Service, and it's from tab 11, page 194 of the brief. If we just have that brought up on screen. All right, I'll just give you a moment to orientate yourself, given that it's not your document. But can you see, Detective Sergeant, that the map displays firstly the Bell's Line of Road?
Yes.
And does that come from the top left-hand side of the map and travel down towards the bottom centre of the map?
Correct.
Now, it might be difficult to see in close-up, but there is a reference along the Bell's Line of Road to the Dalpura sector. I'm not sure if you can see that.
I can see that, yes.
All right. Do you know what that refers to?
That was the two different sectors. They allocated the names to Bell's Line of Road and Mount Wilson Road, with Bell's Line of Road being the Dalpura sector and October sector being along Mount Wilson Road.
So if we put this in broader context, you're there referring to a planned backburn to be undertaken by the Rural Fire Service and perhaps other authorities in light of what they estimated was the approach of the Gospers Mountain fire. Is that right? And do you know what the anchor point was under that planned backburn as displayed on this map?
My understanding is that it started at the intersection and continued along Bell's Line of Road, approximately 300 metres, and then it went from the point of the intersection up towards the township of Mount Wilson.
And where you say the intersection, are you referring to the area marked on the map with the red arrow that says Backburn commencement point at 9:50?
That's correct.
And does Mount Wilson Road proceed in a north-easterly direction from the intersection with Bell's Line of Road there?
That's correct.
And was the October sector staged along Mount Wilson Road?
That's correct.
Tell me if this is a fair summary. Was the plan at the time that the backburn was commenced for the Dalpura section to burn to the north of Bell's Line of Road
That's correct.
and the October sector to burn to the west of Mount Wilson Road?
That's correct.
In the course of your investigation, have you formed a conclusion as to where the fire that we call the Gross Valley Fire actually commenced by reference to that map?
Where it breached containment,
Yes.
on the eastern side of Mount Wilson Road, somewhere where it's actually written on their Bell Division.
Do you-
Somewhere in that vicinity.
Thank you. Do you know, Detective Sergeant, who first reported that a fire had spotted to the east of Mount Wilson Road?
It was one of the air support, air attack, or one of the air crews.
RFS, Air Support?
Yes.
And do you know who they first reported that to?
The person in charge of I believe it was a radio broadcast, and they've broadcast it to the person that was in charge of the operation at that point in time.
And is it your understanding that the person who broadcast it via the radio broadcast was actually in the air surveying the fire ground at the time they reported the spot over?
That's right.
Have you, since you've been allocated responsibility for this investigation, visited the scene of the alleged spot over for yourself?
Yes, I have.
Are you able to describe to Her Honour what the fuel load and the geography of the scene was like at the time of your investigation?
I attended the scene after the fire had significantly burnt most of the fuel load, but at my knowledge, it was very, very dry at that time of the year back then, and it's thick, dense bushland, so there was a lot of leaf litter and a lot of dry material in the area.
Even allowing for the fact that the fire had consumed, or presumably consumed, some of the fuel load that was there prior to the fire igniting, was it an easy scene for you to access physically?
No, it's simply too difficult to walk into the spot where the breach of containment was.
Why?
It's the terrain is gullies and thick bushland, and it's almost inaccessible by foot.
Approximately how long after the fire was this investigation that you conducted for yourself?
It would have been at least a week. It was the day before the road opened, and I can't recall what that date was. I went in there when the road was still closed to the public, so the fire was still smouldering at that point.
Right. Do you know whether the witness from the air support crew who made the first radio broadcast reporting the spot over, do you know whether that witness recalled seeing any people in the immediate vicinity of the spot overs? And would it be fair to say that the geography that you've seen for yourself at the scene means it's unlikely that there would have been people in that vicinity? Is that because there's actually no good reason to be anywhere near the vicinity of where the spot overs were first observed?
Correct.
Detective Sergeant, could you turn please to page 16 of your statement using the red numbers in the bottom right-hand corner of the brief, or it's page 14 of 23 using your numbering.
I have that.
I'm going to ask you some questions now going to your request for an investigation of the area of origin for the spot over or spot overs at Mount Wilson Road. Do you see at paragraph 104, you say, as part of my investigation, I made a request through the RFS fire investigation and New South Wales Forensic Services to conduct an examination of the scene where the backburn started?
Yes.
All right. Firstly, how did you make that request?
I was dealing with Cheryl Cook, I believe her name was. She was on the investigation team for the RFS. So we communicated via email because of the frantic nature of the time for the RFS. And I believe it was Greg Moon from our Forensic Services unit who was coordinating the examinations at the time.
You've said examinations. Are we talking about more than one?
Yes, I believe he was trying to coordinate the Gospers Mountain fire as well as the Gross Valley fire.
Again, this investigation into the Gross Valley fire was taking place at a time when there were many fires across the state of New South Wales requiring investigations. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And most particularly for your purposes, Gospers Mountain, along with the Gross Valley fire.
That's right.
You say in paragraph 104, I provided the area of the starting point. Do you see that?
Yes.
All right. What area did you provide?
I would have said on the corner of Mount Wilson Road and Bell's Line of Road at Mount Tomah.
Was that based upon the information that you've already referred to as having been available to you prior to conducting your cause and origin investigation?
That's right.
Was it your expectation that the investigation into the cause and origin of the fire would commence in the vicinity that you had nominated?
Yes, I believed it would.
And were your expectations met?
No, they were not.
In what way were they not met?
Several weeks later, I believe it was, I spoke to the person that was allocated for crime scene for the New South Wales Police to attend the scene, and I liaised with him, and he briefly informed me that they'd started in the bush in the Gross Valley and determined that the cause of the Gross Valley fire was from a spot over from the Gospers Mountain fire. I communicated with him that that wasn't right, and I didn't ask for the investigation to start in the Gross Valley. I'd asked for it to start on the road and asked if he knew why that was the case. And he informed me that he took information from the RFS investigator and from the investigation team from the RFS that that was the point that they were led to, and that's where they started their cause and origin report.
Right, well, just let me hold you there. Her Honour has received reports into the cause and origin of the Gross Valley fire that are contained within the brief, which I assume you have also read, including a report by the Rural Fire Service and a report by Police, Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Command. Are they the reports you're referring to?
Yes.
And those two reports each focus upon the point at which a fire crossed the Gross River and took on the name, or was thereafter named, the Gross Valley fire. Is that right?
That's right.
Is your investigation into how and where that fire actually started assisted by understanding where the fire then crossed the Gross River?
In relation to where the fire burnt and perhaps the pattern of the fire, yes, but as to the cause and origin, no.
When you became aware that that was the focus of the cause and origin investigation undertaken by the Rural Fire Service and the Police Forensic Services Command, what if anything, did you do?
I attempted to phone Cheryl Cook and I sent an email to Cheryl Cook at the RFS investigation team and let her know that I wasn't happy with why I wasn't being informed the reason that they didn't start at where I had requested. And I believe I had a short conversation with Darren Howe about that, and he indicated to me that I should ask Cheryl Cook. I wasn't really given an answer as to why in the end. However, yeah.
It seems from your statement, if you have regard to paragraph 106, and in particular the last sentence of that paragraph, that a New South Wales fire and rescue investigator also attended for the cause and origin investigation with the RFS and police. Is that right? Do you know why the fire and rescue investigator participated?
I believe that's just what we have as a process for the RFS investigator to attend as well with the expertise.
Well, the fire and rescue investigator similarly focused their investigation on the point where the fire had crossed the Gross River. Is that right? Yes. Tell me if you agree with this proposition. There has been no physical forensic investigation of the area where you understand the backburn along Mount Wilson Road is believed to have spotted to the east of the road.
That's correct.
You've conducted your own investigation, walking the ground as best you can, but you don't have the specialty expertise to attempt a cause and origin investigation at that scene. Is that right?
That's right.
If a physical forensic investigation of the area where you understand the fire had spotted to the east side of Mount Wilson Road had been undertaken, would that have been a useful step in your investigation into cause and origin?
Yes, I believe it needed to be done.
It might not provide any information about where the spot over originated from. Would you agree with that? Or it might have provided some sort of information to investigators that would help them determine from which sector of the backburn the spot over originated.
That's the case, yes.
We just don't know. Do you understand that there may have been more than one spot over from the backburn set anchored along Bell's Line of Road and Mount Wilson Road across to the eastern side of Mount Wilson Road?
That's right.
Would you agree that a physical scene investigation of the point where the fire is believed to have spotted over might have assisted in determining the location of those spot over ignition points?
It may have, yes.
And it might assist in the court definitively excluding a range of other potential ignition sources?
Yes, it would have.
Again, we don't know what it might have revealed because it hasn't been completed. Is that a fair summary? Detective Sergeant, in your statement at paragraph 114, you refer to receiving the factual investigation report undertaken by the Rural Fire Service into the Gospers Mountain Fire, and in particular, the part of that factual investigation report that focuses on the impact on Mount Wilson and Bilpin. Do you recall receiving that report? Although that report is specifically expressed as not including a cause and origin investigation, did it nonetheless help your consideration of the cause and origin for the Gross Valley Fire?
Yes, it did.
In what way?
It gave me specific information in relation to all sorts of data that was gathered with information including the air support, the grid references, and a background explanation of the times and the wind and where the backburn was up to and how it was burning at the time.
Did it propose two hypotheses as to which part of the backburn, which sector, may have generated the fire that spotted over Mount York Road?
Yes.
Before we get to those two hypotheses, I just want to take you to some other potential ignition sources and get you to explain whether or not you agree that they can be now excluded as a potential ignition source for this fire. Do you follow? I'll do that firstly by asking you to turn to page 24 of your statement using the numbers in the bottom right-hand corner, the red numbers, or 22 of 23 using your numbering. Then within that page, Detective Sergeant, could you go to paragraph 154 and the last sentence of that paragraph?
Yes.
Do you see there you quote from or you refer to the RFS factual investigation report and the observation from Mr O'Donnell that the spot fires were a significant distance from the main fire front and the investigation was not aware of any other potential ignition sources?
That's right.
In the course of your investigation, did you obtain any evidence to suggest that the fire that started to the east of Mount Wilson Road in fact spotted from the Gospers Mountain Fire somewhere to the north?
Sorry, could you ask, what was the first part of your question?
Did you obtain any evidence to suggest that the fire that spotted or started to the east of Mount Wilson Road might have actually spotted from the Gospers Mountain Fire, then burning some kilometres away to the north?
No, there was no evidence to suggest that was the case.
Is it your evidence that it would be safe for Her Honour to exclude that as a potential cause of the Gross Valley Fire?
It's very safe to suggest that.
Moving then to other potential ignition sources, in the course of your investigation, did you obtain any evidence to suggest that power lines or electricity infrastructure might be implicated in the Gross Valley Fire?
No, there was no suggestions for that.
Lightning?
No lightning strikes.
Campfire?
No camping, no.
Smoking? Debris burning? Equipment usage?
No.
Juvenile fire play? Any other evidence pointing to suspicious circumstances leading to the ignition of this fire?
Nothing at all.
Do you accept, though, that the conclusions that you there express, excluding those potential ignition sources, are based on the absence of any evidence rather than the physical examination of the scene, which would definitively exclude things like campfires and cigarette smoking? Detective Sergeant, tell me if you agree with this as a proposition addressing the cause of the Mount Wilson Road fire. that it can reasonably be recorded as arising as a result of a spot over to the east of Mount Wilson Road from a strategic backburn lit in an attempt by the Rural Fire Service to strengthen a southern containment line in response to the Gospers Mountain fire. Detective Sergeant, after the fire had passed through the Mount Wilson and Mount Tomah communities and other communities nearby, were you involved in attempts to canvass people in those communities directly affected by the fire?
Yes.
What did that involve?
If we could make contact with them via phone, I would attempt to phone the people, or on several days I drove to the areas where I was informed were affected properties. The spreadsheets were supplied by both the RFS and the New South Wales Police. I'd attend those properties if it was possible to speak to those people, if they were still on the property, or most of the contact was done through phoning those people because they were not able to live on their property.
Is it fair to say that you were unable to speak to residents at some of the affected properties in the area?
Yes, that's definitely the case.
And does that mean that the information contained within the brief that sets out details around property loss and damage should be treated as estimates?
Yes, that's right.
Because there are in fact some discrepancies between different counts as to the number of properties or outbuildings damaged by the fire.
Yes, that's right.
Detective Sergeant, in the course of your investigation, is it fair to say that a number of community members raised concerns with you about the response to the Gospers Mountain fire by the Rural Fire Service and other government entities?
Yes, that's right.
Now, those concerns are not being explored today, but I want you to tell me if you agree with this broad summary of the general topics that were raised with you by community members. Community concerns can be broadly summarised into 5 topics or categories, and tell me if you agree. Firstly, the need for a backburn in response to the Gospers Mountain fire. 2, the timing of the backburn.
Yes, correct.
3, the actual location for the backburn. 4, the way in which the backburn itself was conducted.
Yes.
And 5, notice to the community about the conduct of the backburn and other events, fire events across December 2019.
Yes, that's right.
Does that sound like a fair, broad summary of the topics that were raised with you?
Yes.
Were there any other broad topics that were raised with you by community members? Again, accepting that we're not investigating those today, but that they may be the subject of stage 2 consideration.
Yes, there were other topics, such as the lack of, or why was there no backburning earlier before the fire season, and perhaps who should have taken charge of the backburning operations.
Thank you, Detective Sergeant. Were there any other broad themes?
Not that I can recall now.
Your Honour, those are my questions for the officer in charge.
Thank you. Mr Newton, do you have any questions?
Yes, Your Honour. Detective, you gave some evidence about the investigation into the cause and origin by an RFS investigator and also an investigator from the Police Forensic Services Group. Do you recall that?
Can you hear the reply, Mr Newton?
No, I can't, Your Honour.
Oh, you might have to just Speak a little bit louder.
Yes, that's correct.
And was it your understanding that the Police Forensic Services Group investigator was Sergeant Neil Welshinger?
That's right.
And as I understand your evidence, the investigation that took place was a different investigation to that which you were seeking. Is that right?
That's correct.
Did you ask Sergeant Welshinger to then undertake the investigation that you were seeking?
Yes, I did.
And do you know why he didn't do that?
I don't know why it wasn't done after that, no.
But he's someone that you understood was qualified to undertake such an investigation, wasn't he?
Yes, it's usually run in conjunction with the RFS.
But I didn't ask that question. I said you understood him to be someone that was qualified to undertake the investigation, didn't you?
He's qualified to undertake a cause and origin investigation, yes.
And ultimately, it was the Rural Fire Service that provided you with further information, which enabled you to come to the conclusions that you've drawn. That's right, isn't it?
I'd say it was almost 8 months later.
But nevertheless, you were provided with a comprehensive report that enabled you to draw the conclusions which you've given evidence about today. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
In terms of the area that you understood the spot fires to have got into, you yourself considered that area too dangerous to walk into. Is that right?
Yes, I'm not qualified to walk into an area like that, no.
And that was because the terrain was steep? Was that one reason?
Yes, that's one of the reasons.
And another was that the terrain had recently been burnt and there was potential for trees to fall and that type of thing?
On the occasion that I was there, that's correct.
There's no further questions, Your Honour.
Thank you, Mr Newton. Anything arising, Ms Ward?
Detective Sergeant, just so we're clear, did you yourself attempt to walk into the scene to the eastern side of Mount York Road where you understood the spot overs may have commenced?
No, I didn't make any attempts.
Did you travel along Mount York Road without attempting to enter the area to the east?
Into Mount Wilson Road.
I'm sorry, Mount York Road is a completely different road. Let me start again. Did you travel along Mount Wilson Road without attempting to physically enter the scene where you understood the spot overs are believed to have ignited?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Detective. Excused.
Now, Your Honour, Mr Wilcox will take the next witness, so if you just give us a couple of minutes to rearrange ourselves at the bar table.
Certainly.
I call Darren Howe.
Mr Howe, can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, I can, Your Honour.
All right, you'll just hear from the court officer now.
Thank you.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Yes, Mr Wilcox.
Would you please state your full name
Darren Charles Howe.
and your professional address?
It's Macarthur Fire Control Centre at Minto, New South Wales.
And what is your occupation?
For the Rural Fire Service, I'm an authorised fire investigation officer. I'm also a remote area firefighter, and I'm also a deputy captain of the local brigade, Middleton.
You have training into the investigation of cause and origin of wildfires, is that correct?
Yes,
And experience as well?
yes, I've completed over 154 wildfire investigations as a leading investigator.
You provided a statement to this inquiry dated 13 September 2020, did you?
Yes,
You have that with you?
yes,
And are the matters set out in it true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
there's one amendment on page 33 of the red numbers.
Yes.
In the second line there, the date says the 21st of January 2019. That should be the 21st of January 2020.
Thank you.
That's
That
the
is in.
amendment.
Thank you. That's your referring there to your fire investigation report, which you annexed to your statement.
Yes,
You attended the RFS Control Centre in Katoomba on the 21st of January 2020, is that correct?
that's correct.
And you said in your report that you were deployed to investigate the Gross Valley fire, that's correct?
That's correct.
Who were you deployed by?
I was activated from our fire investigation compliance unit.
Was there any particular person that deployed you, or it just came from the unit?
I can't actually remember who called me, but
And on the 21st of January 2020, you spoke with RFS and National Parks and Wildlife staff at the Katoomba Fire Control Centre, and they advised you against proceeding into Gross Valley as the area hadn't been assessed for dangerous trees and tracks were blocked by fallen trees in several locations.
that's correct.
And then you reviewed some maps and identified the Walls Lookout as the area that you'd travelled to for the purpose of your cause and origin investigation.
That's correct.
And you said that Walls Lookout was deemed as the closest safe access point to where the fire crossed from the escarpment into Gross Valley.
That was in discussion with the incident management team at Katoomba Fire Control Centre. That would have been the best place to have a look looking from the north, looking south.
Was the Section 44 for Gross Valley still active as at 21 January 2020?
Not sure.
And you said in your answer that there was a discussion with the incident management team at Katoomba Fire Control Centre as to the identification of Walls Lookout as the closest, safest access point. Who did you have that discussion with?
It was the National Parks and the RFS personnel on duty.
And you followed their advice.
That's correct.
And you said that the RFS staff advised that the Gross Valley fire was originally the Gospers Mountain fire and only renamed the Gross Valley fire when the fire crossed the Gross River.
Yes, the scope of the investigation was the Gross Valley fire started at the Gross River, and then to the south of that was the Gross Valley fire. Anything north of that was the Gospers fire.
Do you remember who gave you that advice as to the scope of the investigation?
It would have been the people in the IMT when I obtained the maps.
And that was on the 21st of January 2020 when you received that advice?
That's correct.
Do you remember which people in particular you were speaking to at the IMT about that matter?
That would have been the RFS personnel on duty.
And is it fair to say that you then focused your cause and origin investigation for the Gross Valley fire as to the location where the fire crossed the Gross River?
That's correct.
Were you aware, as at 21 January 2020, that a backburn had taken place at Mount Wilson on the 14th of December 2019, or near Mount Wilson, during which there was a breach of containment that led to impact on properties in Mount Wilson and surrounding communities in the days that followed?
No,
So as at the 21st of January 2020, you had no knowledge of the breach of containment at the Mount Wilson and Bell's Line of Road backburn?
no,
So it follows that when you completed your cause and origin investigation on the 21st of January 2020, you did not consider that the Gross Valley fire was a continuation of a breach of containment from the Mount Wilson backburn.
no, the scope of my investigation started from the Gross River and to the south of the river, so I had to determine where the fire and why the fire crossed the river.
Turning to that investigation, on the 21st of January 2020, you were accompanied by Sergeant Welshinger from New South Wales Police and Susan Bayliss from Fire and Rescue New South Wales. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And they are both trained fire investigators, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, yes.
Is it
I'm
common?
assuming, sorry.
No, go on, complete your answer.
I'm assuming the crime scene investigator was fire trained. The first time I've met him.
Is it common for Fire and Rescue New South Wales staff to complete cause and origin investigations of bushfires, in your experience?
They were brought along for a special tasking because we don't have access to drone capability at that stage. So the Fire and Rescue have drone capability. So we brought Fire and Rescue with their drone along. So if we need to send the drone down in the valley to give us further insight into the fire, how the fire crossed, that's what they were there for.
Was the drone used on that occasion?
No.
Do you know why?
It was obvious to see that there was nothing from where we were standing. There was nothing that we could consider, and thinking that if the drone got lost down there, then you might not access the drone to retrieve it. So there was no reason to operate the drone.
Just to understand your answer, you said it was obvious from where we were standing there was no reason to consider you'd use the drone. Was that your answer?
Yeah, there's no obvious, we didn't see anything obvious from the top of Walls Lookout, which would require us to have a closer look in that area with the drone.
So there were no obvious fire indicators or areas of interest that you couldn't see from the naked eye?
Well, no, we had telephoto lenses on our cameras and that sort of stuff where we could focus in fairly close, and that gave us a good enough picture to have a look.
I'll bring up page 39 of the brief, which is sketch 2 in your report.
It's
That document shows where you stood on the 21st of January 2020 at Walls Lookout, where the two green figures are. Is that correct?
yes.
And that's what, sorry?
It's an approximate. Like it's
Approximate.
Yeah.
And the red arrows show the approximate movement of the fire travelling, as indicated, in the southwestern direction from Bell's Line of Road into the Gross Valley and over the Gross River and continuing towards Hanging Rock.
Yes, that's correct. And that was used in conjunction with the maps on page 42 and 43 to determine that.
I'll bring up page 47 of the brief, which is photo D4 from your report.
Yes.
Do you have that with you?
Yes.
And your description for that image is that it shows an area of higher intensity burning on the northern side of the Gross Valley River on the steep terrain in the same area as the higher intensity burning on the southern side?
Yes.
Well, that was the description you gave in the body of your report.
That's correct.
Can you describe what is the significant aspect of that photograph to Her Honour?
That's looking in the direction where the maps showed that the fire actually crossed. The progression map showed the fire crossed the river. You can see in the slope on this side of the terrain, on the northern side of the river, there's a bit of high intensity burning, which could be higher fuel loads. And then on the far side, just before that green area, you can see there's another little bit of intense burning in that side, which supports and you can see the rest of it's basically all burnt very similar. So there's nothing there that simulates that there's any difference in the burn except for those two areas of a bit of high intensity.
So is the higher intensity demonstrated by the shadowing on this slope?
Yeah, it looks like black inside those orange areas.
Yes.
So there's one on the northern side, which is closest to us, and there's one on the southern side, which is further away, just on the bottom of the slope at the base of the river, basically.
Yes. I'll bring up the next page, which is page 48 of the brief and photo D5. Is that the same aspect but zoomed out?
Yes, that's correct.
Bringing up then page 50, which is photo D7. Your description and body of your report was that it shows an area of higher intensity burning on the southern side of the Gross Valley River, approximate area where the fire was determined to have crossed the Gross Valley River using the maps and information supplied by Blue Mountains FCC.
That's correct.
Are we looking here at a similar area to the earlier photographs?
That's correct. What I started with my photos is and I just took multiple photos as I was going from the west to the east. So a lot of these photos will still have similar parts of it. The thing to look at is that green area down the bottom in the river. So that would show you as you look at the photos, that green area goes more to the right. So it shows that the photo is slowly moving around to the east.
And in terms of the southern slope, which area is of interest to Horonum when looking at this photograph?
If you see where the green patch is in the right-hand side there,
yes,
just before the green patch, you'll see a dark black area surrounded by some orange shading.
And is that to the left or the right of the green patch?
It's to the left.
Thank you.
And that's coming up the slope away from the river.
For completeness, I'll bring up page 51 of the brief, photograph 8. Is that there showing the southern side of the river with more intense burning?
That's the close. That's as close as I could get with my zoom on the camera to the intensity.
Yes, and I think on that point there's an even further zoomed in image at photo 9, which is page 52 of the brief, which I'll bring up.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's showing the higher intensity burning on the southern aspect of Gross River.
Yes.
Turning then to the cause and origin the causes that you considered in your report, you eliminated campfire as a potential cause. Did you?
Just because of the remote access area of that location.
Yes, and you also eliminated cigarettes.
Once again, the access for people is very difficult, so it'd be unlikely that someone would get down there.
Yes, and for that reason it follows you eliminated juvenile fire players and other potential cause.
That's correct.
Did you identify on that point when you described the access as remote and difficult, whether there were any walking tracks on either side of the Gross River at that approximate area of spotting over the river?
Not exactly where that is. There are other tracks that will take you down the Gross Valley, but not at that point where we were looking at.
Can you describe the terrain at that area in any detail?
Very steep, very rugged. It is quite rocky in there, and I have personally been down the southern side of the Gross Valley, not when the fires were here. So it is very steep, very rocky, and it is very, very bushy.
And is it the case that you also discarded or eliminated potential human-related causes of the fire at that location on the basis that it was clear that there was a large fire to the north of the Grace River which had progressed down the valley.
That's correct.
I'll bring up on that point page 42 of the brief, which is an icon map, map 1 on your terminology.
Yep.
And that shows the movement of the fire from the north coming south towards Grace River and crossing it on the 19th December 19 in the evening.
Yes, 1747 hours.
And we can see the Grace River faintly travelling in a bottom rightwards direction from the top left, and then it becomes overlapped by parts of that fire marked in the black with red border.
That's correct.
Thank you. It was your ultimate conclusion in the report that the Grace Valley fire was therefore a continuation of the Gospers Mountain fire. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you reached that conclusion having regard to, first of all, your own cause and origin investigation at the Walls Lookout?
Yes.
And also what you'd been told at the Blue Mountains Fire Control Centre?
That's correct.
And what you were told at the Blue Mountains Fire Control Centre on in the day of your investigation was that the Grace Valley fire was a continuation of the Gospers Mountain fire, correct?
That's correct.
In terms of the Mount Wilson backburn, do you today have knowledge as to the circumstances of that event?
No, I've heard about it, but I wasn't in the scope of my investigation.
I'll bring up page 41 of the brief.
Yes.
This is a document looking at lightning strike data. I'll have it zoomed into the intersection of Bell's Line of Road and Mount Wilson Road, which is sort of the top left in the green area. To the left of the word Hawkesbury, you can see a Bell's Line of Road running south-west with a slightly pinker Mount Wilson Road or line running northeast up to the White Township marked faintly as Mount Wilson. Do you see that area of the map?
Yes. Yes.
I'd ask you to accept that the red line is the Bell's Line of Road and the pink line is Mount Wilson Road.
Correct.
Do you have familiarity with that area more generally?
I have been up there, yes.
You've been to Mount Wilson?
I did a search with the police at Mount Wilson on motorbikes, RFS motorbikes.
When was that?
Oh, that was when that girl went missing, the young girl went missing sometime this year, I think it was.
Now, it's the case, just to orient you, that on the 14th of December 2019, there was a strategic backburn at the intersection of Mount Wilson Road and Bell's Line of Road, with one burn progressing up the western side of Mount Wilson Road and another burning simultaneously up the eastern side of Bell's Line of Road, or northern side. You understand where I'm orienting you there?
Yes.
And during the course of the afternoon, some spot overs were apparent on the eastern side of Mount Wilson Road where the burn was not planned to proceed. Do you understand that?
Yes.
I want to ask you some questions related to that to the extent you can assist the court. I'll bring up now page 1101 of the Gospers Mountain brief. And I'll zoom in. So for your benefit as to how the Gospers Mount, this is a fire progression map from ICON from the 14th of December 19 to the 15th. It shows the Gospers Mountain fire in the yellow shade, and then beneath that is a small darker diamond shade which represents the backburn at Mount Wilson. Can you see that?
Yes.
What I'm going to do now is bring up progressive fire progression mapping just to show how those two fires progressively enlarged. The next page is 1108 of the Gospers brief. This is from the 15th of December to the next day. You can see the Mount Wilson backburn is what I'll refer to that, or the Mount Wilson fire is what I'll refer to that smaller image. That one has increased, you see that?
Yes.
And then I'll bring up page 1114 of the Gospers brief. This is now showing the next day, 16th to 17th of December. The Mount Wilson fire is now a pink greater area. You see that?
Yes.
And then I'll bring up page...
Sorry, the Bellsmore Road's not shown on that, is it?
I don't know if it's marked out as a map, and in that event it's a bit too small to make out. But orienting you on the basis of those two areas that are progressively growing. The next page is 1123 of the brief of Gospers Mountain. This is from the 17th of December to the 18th of December. You see the Mount Wilson fire's broadly the same size, maybe a bit larger.
Yes.
And then the next page is 1133 of the Gospers Mountain brief. You see there, this is from the 18th to the 19th of December. The Mount Wilson fire has grown somewhat and Gospers Mountain is getting closer, particularly on the right-hand side. You see that?
Yes.
And then I'll bring up the next page, 1143 of the Gospers Mountain brief. And if it can be, this is from the 19th of December to the 20th, if it can be zoomed in possibly to near the word Lithgow, you can see there, can't you, that where the Gospers Mountain fire is and the Mount Wilson fire is very close, but not quite joined according to this map.
Yes.
Then I will bring up page 1152 of the Gospers brief. This is from the next day, 20 December to 21 December, and I'll ask it to be zoomed in again to that same area. This appears to show those two areas of Gospers Mountain and the Mount Wilson, or their marked Gross Valley fire, joining. You agree with that?
Yes.
And then almost completed is page 1160 of the Gospers Mountain brief. And zoom in again, this is from the next day of the 21st of December to the 22nd of December. It's now one solid pink area from the Gospers Mountain down to Gross Valley, where Gross Valley is marked out in green and blue, but not below that. You see that?
Yes. So the green is Gross Valley, you're telling me? So it must be the Gross River.
South of the Gross River?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the final fire progression map I'll show you is page 1168 from the Gospers Mountain brief. And this is from the 22nd of December to the 23rd of December, showing that the fire at that stage. Mr. Howe, having reviewed those fire progression maps, albeit briefly, do they tell you that the Gospers Mountain fire and the fire which originated in Mount Wilson coalesced around December 2019? Can you say?
If you go back to page 41 in the statement, which is the lightning map.
41 on the brief number, 41, yes.
Read 41.
Thank you. And we'll bring that up for convenience, yes.
This is the lightning data that I brought up, which covers the 18th of the 12th to the 20th of the 12th. You can see that there's no lightning in the area where the maps show that the fire crossed, but there is significant lightning, and that's only going back to the 18th. You could have went back further. There is significant lighting to the east of Mount Wilson Road. So I use this map just to eliminate that where I determined the fire continued across to the river, there was no lightning which would have caused that, but quite possibly you're saying that fire started to progress on the 14th. If you had went back further, because it wasn't in my scope, you could have found that there might have been more lightning in that area, which could have been a possible cause.
Can you just explain that answer one more time? Sorry.
Okay, so I used this lightning data just to determine that there was no lightning at least 2 days prior to when Gross Valley Fire was declared. So you can see where the red line comes down and sort of does a U shape. Mount Wilson Road is just a little bit to the left of that. So where we determined the fire crossed was between Mount Wilson Road and that U shape. And it's about, to the lookout from Bell's Liner Road, is about 3.8 kilometres, 3.9 kilometres. So it's a fair distance in. So we determined that's where the fire started. So I wanted to eliminate any cause of lightning in that specific area, which I have done with this map up to 2 days prior. But then if you look from on the right-hand side of the map, there's significant amount of lightning from the bottom, even going all the way up towards the top, that shows there was lightning in that specific area. So, I didn't investigate the Gospers fire, but you would have to look back at the lightning data to see whether there was any significant lightning there that may have caused a hotspot in that area.
Yes. But when you considered when I showed you that fire progression mapping, do you agree, first of all, that the fire at Mount Wilson area and the Gospers Mountain area appeared to merge on that map around the 20th of December 2019?
That's correct.
And that's what that a merge, coalesce, the terminology doesn't matter. It was the same fire area.
Yes, and that's what we pointed out in page 42 and 43. That shows the progression of the fire. On page 43, the fire hadn't crossed the Gross Valley River at that stage, and that was at 11:18 in the morning. And then on page 42, it shows at 17:47, which is 5:47 in the afternoon, at that map, that it had crossed the river.
Is it possible to say from the material you've received and been shown today whether the Gospers Mountain fire moved south across the area already burnt following the Mount Wilson backburn, or alternatively whether the area from the Mount Wilson backburn was essentially already burnt out and that the Gospers Mountain fire stopped where the Mount Wilson backburn had occurred?
No, without investigating, I couldn't make that comment.
Had you gone to the area of the Mount Wilson backburn on the 21st of January 2020 instead of the Walls Lookout, would it have been possible to determine cause and origin of the fire that impacted Mount Wilson at that stage?
That was not in my scope. My scope was the Gross Valley fire, which the Gross Valley fire was determined as being south of the Gross River.
But theoretically, hypothetically, had you gone to or been tasked to go to where the initial spot over from the Mount Wilson backburn was thought to have occurred, would you have been able to identify cause and origin at that location had you gone there?
I object.
It's pretty hard to say that.
Just one moment, Mr. Howe. Yes. Mr. Newton.
Your Honour, it's of such hypothetical nature as to be of no use to you at all in this inquiry. He refers to a spot over, which is in a location which Mr. Howe has no idea where that is. And that would require, to answer the question, you have to know what the terrain was like, what the vegetation was like, and in the absence of all of those, the variables, any opinion that the witness gives is of no utility. And indeed, there are other people that are better placed to answer the question who have thought about those issues, who have been called tomorrow.
I don't press the question.
Not pressed. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr Newton.
Given the, in general, is there any added difficulty in determining cause and origin of a fire that's occurred as a result of a spot over?
There would be different fire indicators, yes.
But it's still possible when observing a suspected spot over or making a cause and origin investigation, it's possible to observe those fire indicators and in some cases reach a conclusion as to cause and origin?
Yes.
And in the case of an uncontrolled or uncontained backburn, I withdraw that. In the case of an uncontained backburn, is there any additional difficulty in determining cause and origin of a fire that results from that set of circumstances?
Well, backburn is contained. It's a firefighting strategy. It's never uncontained as such.
If aware of a spot over from a backburn that led to the fire moving down to the Gross Valley, if you'd been aware of that, should an investigation of cause and origin of the Gross Valley fire have attempted to examine the ignition point of the spot overs, in your opinion?
No.
Why is that?
My scope was the Gross Valley fire, which was from the Gross River south. Anything north of that was the Gospers fire. So it wasn't within my scope of investigation.
Excuse me, Your Honour. Having regard to the fire progression maps I showed you earlier on the screen, you recall those?
Yes.
You agree, don't you, that what those maps demonstrated was that there was a discrete fire which commenced in the Mount Wilson area that later joined with the Gospers Mountain fire, correct?
Yes. The difficulty with those progression maps you showed me is you couldn't make out the Gross River and you couldn't make out Bells Liner Road. So
yes, but you were
just by the picture you're showing me that the fires did eventually merge, but to get where it was actually located without having Bells Liner Road as a guideline and the Gross River as a guideline, it's really difficult with those photos. And once you zoom in, you lose all the text and everything. So it's quite difficult to see on those.
But you recall that there were distinct fires as marked by the fire progression map that joined up at some point. That's what I showed you, and
Yes.
you agree that's what they showed.
Yes.
Given
Yes.
that there was a separate fire, and what I'd say to you is it was a fire at Mount Wilson which was separate from the Gospers Mountain fire, which later joined together. Would you agree that the Gross Valley fire was not a continuation of the Gospers Mountain fire when it crossed the Gross Valley River and was renamed thus?
No.
Why is that?
It's the fire, as far as I'm concerned, is anything that was north of the Gross Valley River was the Gospers fire.
And that's because of the scope of investigation that was within your brief when you attended the Katoomba Fire Control Centre.
Well, my scope was to investigate the Gross Valley fire. Then when I spoke to the IMT at Katoomba, they determined that the Gross Valley fire was created on the 20th of December at 11:20 in the morning, and the boundary of that fire was the Gross River and anything south of it. So anything north of the river, to my understanding, I didn't investigate that, and to my understanding was the Gospers fire.
Yes, and you were guided by the creation of the Gross, or the logging of the Gross Valley fire on the 20th of January being the 20th of December being the critical event. Is that correct?
That's when the fire was created, the Gross Valley Fire.
Excuse me, Your Honour. No further questions.
Thank you. Mr Newton?
No questions, Your Honour.
Thanks very much, Mr Howe. You're excused.
Thank you, Your Honour.
That completes the evidence for today, Your Honour. There are 2 witnesses remaining in the Gross Valley Fire inquiry, and we'll hear from them tomorrow, Sergeant Walshinger and Mr O'Donnell from the RFS. So I'd seek to stand the case over till tomorrow.
Yes, all right. We'll adjourn till 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Please accord.